But yeah, great. Now it seems that it's 20 to 8 and we are getting started. Welcome all to this Heräämö, this extraordinary Heräämö. The topic today is transforming society through behavioral change, and it's great to see that there are already over 110 people online. Great. My name is Salla Nurminen, and I'm your host today, also here online. And before we jump into the topic, I'm going to tell you a few things about Heräämö and also the concepts, also the timetable or the schedule of this morning. So now 8:40 we are starting, and because we have many new participants, many, I would say, new faces, but to be honest, I can't see all of your faces because there are over 100 people online at the moment. But we think that it's very, very important to tell a little bit about the background of this Heräämö concept before we jump in. And if we have new Zoom users, we are going to briefly go through these features on Zoom as well. So how to use Zoom, how to get most out of this event. Then around 9 o'clock, we will move on to the topic of the day with our awesome speaker. And as mentioned earlier, this won't be only a speech or stream as such, but rather more interactive workshop. So I hope that you are prepared and you know that you're going to have a great possibility to actually try this behavioral design canvas tool. And we hope that you're getting familiar, you familiarize yourself with that so that maybe you can use it in the future. So yeah, for this hour between 9 and 10, we will discuss about behavioral change and do some exercises. Then at 10 o'clock, there is time for questions and answers, and also we will collectively key takeaways, because we got feedback in earlier Heräämös that it would be nice to know also what other participants have been thinking about the event, or mostly about the topic of the day. So we will collect these key takeaways and then talk a little bit about next steps. And at 10:30, the event ends. So about Heräämö. So Heräämö is Sitra Labs' monthly based event concept, and we started this in last September. And it means that this is our 7th Heräämö event. And usually we have these events in Helsinki, in Started Helsinki venue. But this time, under these extraordinary circumstances, we decided to bring this completely online and organize it on Zoom. And this is our first time when we organize this completely on Zoom. So I also ask for your patience if something happens with technology or such. And the idea behind Heräämö was that we wanted to create a place for people who consider themselves as change makers, people who are interested in wicked problems and especially ways of tackling them. So we wanted to create a place for these people to meet each other, to network, and also to learn and hear about topics related to this change making. And yeah, these are open events, and we're really happy that every time there are new faces and also familiar faces. So that's great, and it's great that all of you are here today as well.
I have, I'm going to do this in 3 sections, so with exercises. So it's going to be rather fast compared to how I do it typically. So I'm going to jump right into it, all right? Well, my background is in design. Well, my background is in design consulting. I studied interaction design, and I was at Deloitte and Accenture Interactive. Now it was then Fjord, and now I I'm a founder of a behavioral lab called Fabric. Some of the core of our work that we do is what I'm going to show you today, or the methodology is what I'm going to share with you today. So that's a little bit about me. And we decided to call this event, focus on the last mile of societal transformation. And what does that mean? This is actually a term that comes from behavioral economics. And the reason behavior change is called the last mile is because we increasingly seem to have a world where we have a lot of opportunities for change. And these opportunities, actually, all of you are opportunity makers, opportunity creators, and change makers. And that's why you're here, I guess. So when you look at the opportunities that you usually have for creating change, you have things like teams build strategies, you work on insights, you develop roadmaps and programs, technologies and tools, and even designs. But many times these opportunity creation mechanisms or means, they don't seem to have the impact that you need. And we've seen this often in the technology sector. I work a lot in that sector, but also in the public sector, nonprofit sector, what have you. You build something, nothing really happens. This could be for profit, it could be non-profit, across all areas. So then what is this missing gap? Why don't all these things have the impact that they should? And that's really because that missing gap from a behavioral standpoint is human action. If you're not ready, if your program doesn't have a dimension that understands human action, if it is not designed to drive human action, stakeholder action, whether this is a stakeholder on the organizational side, whether the stakeholder is the end customer, the end user, or the person that the program or project has to impact, if that last mile of behavior change is not bridged, then typically you end up with no impact. And that's the reason I find that the metaphor of the last mile, of the final mile, is a really excellent one to communicate the importance of behavior change, because people need to make a change in their behavior if a design, a technology, a project, a program has to be adopted and used. It means that they are doing something differently. And that's what we're going to go into today. So I hope that metaphor is clear, and that's the way to think about it, and I think that's the way to talk about it. And when you're working on projects, I urge you to think, have we actually considered human behavioral change, or are we just leaving it to chance and hoping it will happen, in which case there's a good chance that it won't. So how do you go about designing for behavior change? These are some of the behavior changes that you may need to... Your slides are not present. My slides are not present. Oh, I'm so sorry. Hang on. I thought, you see it now? Yes. Sorry, guys. Terribly sorry. I thought I pushed it, but then, yeah. So these were the slides that I was actually talking about. Sorry, this is new to me as well, clearly. So, yeah. I was trying to illustrate that, you have these opportunities for change, such as team strategies and so on. But then if you want to make impact in the real world, then you need action, which is typically change in human behavior. This is where I was really. This is the key slide. You have opportunities, you're looking for impact, but then you need to make change in behavior. And that's the reason that last bit of behavior change is called the final mile, right? I hope that makes sense. So the kinds of behavior changes that, if you look from a change maker view, there's so many micro and macro level changes that you would need to think about. For example, you can get car owners, for example, if you need to declutter the streets and get car owners to use public transport, that's a behavior change that you are trying to make. On the other hand, there's the number of gym memberships that are actually wasted. So people actually spend money getting the gym membership, but then they never really go to the gym. And that's completely crazy. It's money wasted. So how do you get people to go to the gym? How do you get customers of the gym to actually go to the gym? That's a big behavior change that could have a societal impact. But also more fundamental things like getting to get kids to actually reach school and stay in school. So you see, when you think about behavior change, you're not just talking about educating more children, it's about the actions, the concrete actions that they will have to do, such as getting there, staying there, completing a course. All of these are concrete actions and therefore behavioral changes that you can target. And looking at a more contemporary sort of a situation right now, which is trying to get citizens to get tested, take certain precautions. So how do you drive those exact actions? And I think the metaphor of social distancing here is sort of interesting because it's kind of like a negative behavior. You're like saying stay away from people, but if you phrased it as what we should do, not what we should not do, because when you say you don't do something, then the question is, so what should we do? I would say phrase social distancing as more time for yourself, walks in nature, reading, maybe playing with your pet. All of these are positive actions, but we'll talk a little bit more about that in the motivation section. Okay. So behavior design really is about moving people to action. That's the core focus of behavior design. And behavior design isn't something that replaces service design or UX design or interaction design. It actually has elements of all of these. But I would say it's a new specialized discipline applying psychology, behavioral economics, and other cognitive psychology, social anthropology, a lot of humanities fields, together with data science, data methods, and experimental methods to drive human action and the decisions around action and the context of action. All right. So the focus of behavior design is to not focus on intentions and not look at intentions and ideas and aspirations, but really concrete actions. It's also to look at how to get people to actually invest in doing things and make a commitment upfront to doing things through action, not just by expressing their commitment. Decision making is a big part of behavior design, but it is not still the final and the whole thing. A lot of behavioral economics, for example, approaches nudge theory, for example, approaches behavior from a decisional standpoint, and all of that is very valuable. But for example, someone might make a decision to, propose to their partner, but then they may take a long time to actually take the action of proposing. So this interesting gap between making a decision and actually waiting to do it. Why does that happen? What are the reasons? That's also an interesting area of behavior design. And finally, the most important thing about behavior that I really enjoyed coming from the experience design world was that behavior actually provides data. Experience is subjective, and experience is it can vary from people to people. So it's very hard to actually get quantitative measure of what is experienced. But when someone takes an action, that's a clear data point. And therefore, when you look at your projects from a behavioral perspective, you can always get measurable feedback and therefore improve your product or process. So I looked at a whole bunch of elements of behavior. I studied them over the last decade, more from the perspective of a designer. I studied psychology and sociology, as I mentioned, as a bachelor. And then I started to apply all of that stuff, which I had studied in behavioral science, from a designer's perspective in my professional work. And these are some of the main areas that I covered, looking at research, white papers, theory, and so on. But the problem with this approach was that I was just kind of, and I think this is what happens in the behavioral design profession as well, or even in the nudging profession, you kind of grab from different theories and you kind of apply them as you go, but it's not really clear why you're applying something. So if you had a particular problem, an expert might say, hey, we should apply some gamification there. And if you have a different problem the next day or a different project, someone might say, well, have you considered personality types? But the problem is, how do you know that this is the right tool or the right theory to apply in a particular context? That was the problem I was trying to solve. And I said, well, being a designer, can't I just synthesize the best of these theories and come up with a more cohesive framework, which actually gives the team a process and a path to go through for the behavior design process? And that's that's how I came up with the behavior design canvas. It's a 3-part framework. It's linear from left to right, and it has 3 parts. The first is target on the left, the middle is something called align, and the third part is shape. And okay, looks like everything's all right. The third part is shape, and this is what the canvas looks like when it's printed large sized and pasted on a wall. You can capture a lot of data on it actually, and I recommend using the canvas like this because the entire team can participate and figure out what is the behavior design mission, or what are the behavior changes that the team is looking at. And this is actually this is a Jamboard version of the canvas that a team that I'm working with called Flower Rescue did just yesterday. And as you can see, there is a lot of information that the canvas can actually take, because once you start looking at all those different pieces, you start looking at a lot of data that it can take. So for today's exercise, do not stress. I know that some of you may have the canvas on your screens, others may have printed it. A few others, neither of them, you still not got the canvas for some reason. Don't worry about it. It only has 2 boxes on the first section, 3 boxes, and then 3 more boxes to fill. So literally you can take a pen and paper and you can write down and say, well, under target, this is my response during your exercise, and under align, this is my response. And I will have the canvas during the discussion of the exercise, so you will be able to map. You'll be able to map your answers quite easily. In any case, today the idea is just to go through the canvas in a very casual, relaxed fashion, look at how the different pieces work, and then figure out, how, just get a hang of it. There are at least 6 or 7 behavioral science theories embedded into the canvas, and that's the reason I'm kind of working on a book on it. I won't be able to go through all the theories right now, but I'll just try to make it very simple for you guys to get a hang of. And so with that, we are right on time to jump into the first section. The way it's going to work today is that I'm going to discuss each section. I will do the first part, target, explain how it works, and I'll jump into align, shape, and you will do one exercise for each part by yourself, okay? An individual exercise. Because you're change makers, today you will work with one behavior change that you yourself want to make in your lives. The target section basically is designed to get over this problem. We have limited human time and attention, and we have too many products and services. So the problem is that we end up with something like this today. You have a very, very spliced up day, pizza-like day, where your time is completely, segmented into different areas. So when we talk about behavior change, the problem that we don't actually consider is that in which of these areas are you actually looking to make the behavior change through your nice design, your nice product, your nice intervention. And that's the reason the first part of the canvas is all about creating the switch between the desired behavior, what you would like the human to do, and from a present behavior. And so I've chosen for myself, the desired behavior I would like to do is go for a bike ride every 2 days. I have a nice bike, and I just want to ride it more. So this is my target behavior, as they call it. And I'm starting to consider what could be the current behavior from which I would like to switch to this target behavior. One of the ideas that comes to my mind actually is this morning yoga. And I do morning yoga sometimes, and I'm thinking, could I replace my morning yoga with a bike ride? But the problem with this sort of a switch is that in the mornings, in that context, typically I'm in a preparatory mood. I'm thinking about the workday ahead, and trying to do something biking, for example, for me is much more relaxing activity. It's not for thinking about work or preparing. So this switch may not really work, because in this context, I'm in a very different mindset than the biking mindset, even though they are both physical activities. So I have actually chosen a different present behavior, which is actually evening before dinner when I browse professional content. So I tend to browse the internet and look at Twitter and stuff and catch up on the professional world in the evenings. I'm thinking, why don't I change this behavior, the present behavior of browsing content in the evening, for going for a bike ride, which would be my target behavior. All right. So that's really the first part of the canvas. It is, and we're right on time for you to go into your exercise. I know this is going a bit fast, but just have fun and don't be too stressed about getting it right. In your first exercise, which you will start in about 30 seconds, you will basically try to map a desired behavior change that you may want in your life, something you can share with us, maybe during the Q&A. It could be personal or professional, which is a target behavior. Don't worry about how often you want to do it or anything like that. Just think of a simple target behavior, but then consider what is the current behavior from which you want to switch to the target behavior. All right. And you're right on time to go into that exercise now. Cool. Okay, so you've actually filled in the first part of your canvas, which is target. And actually, you'll see when you use the canvas more and do behavior design projects, the target part of the canvas is the most underappreciated. You typically think that, well, it's easy to target a behavior and we know what we want to do. But actually, if you think about it from an organizational change context or a stakeholder change context or a citizen change context, it takes a lot of work to actually come down to the target behavior, to figure out what is it that we want the target individual to change. And this happens as a team process. So don't think of the canvas as something like sort of like a strict process where once you fill the target behavior, you have to stick to that target behavior. It's much more like a dynamic piece, dynamic landscape where you can actually work on the target behavior. You can refine it as you go forward. Now we're going to jump into the second part of the canvas, align. So you start here, you move into align, you move into shape, and then if you think that there is something different you can target here, or there's an adaptation of what you did, that's totally fine. In fact, I recommend building multiple canvases, and that's why interactive tools like Jamboard are really starting to be interesting. So moving on to align, which is the second part of the canvas. Align is really about aligning the target behavior with the user's motivation. And this is where things get really interesting, because we have to think about human motivation as a sort of the fuel for human behavior. If people don't have motivation to do something, it's going to be terribly hard to actually get them to do something. So the align part of the canvas basically tries to figure out, is the human motivated to do the target behavior, which you have defined here? And then we're trying to figure out if they have the ability to do the target behavior, because you're going to need both motivation and ability to do that behavior. And I'll go a little bit into what motivation and ability look like to do that. And the other decision point is there are, of course, target behaviors that you do not want, that people do not have the motivation to do. And then it becomes really interesting as to how to get them motivated to do it, which is a totally different challenge. So if you think of a simple situation like walking past a coffee shop in the morning, you might have the motivation, you might have the habit of drinking coffee, you're walking past the coffee shop, the context is morning, you want your morning coffee, you might have the motivation. But then if you don't have the money, for example, you do not have the ability to drink that coffee, you cannot buy it. If the coffee shop isn't open, you don't have the ability to get coffee. If the coffee shop is open, but the machine is not working, or they don't have beans, or the barista is not present, or for any of these reasons, you don't have the ability actually to drink coffee. So in order for the target behavior of drinking coffee there to happen, you need to have both the motivation. On the other hand, you can have a lot of the ability. You can have the shop open, you can have the coffee available, the barista is smiling at you, and he's probably even giving it to you for free as an offer. But if you don't have the motivation, the drive to drink coffee, someone doesn't drink coffee, they drink tea, or they're a teetotaler, then they are not going to, then the behavior of drinking coffee is not going to happen. So you see, that's how both motivation and ability are required. And this comes out of BJ Fogg's thinking, but also Edward Deci and Richard Ryan's work on self-determination theory. So there's a couple of behavioral theories behind this particular part of the canvas. So for example, if you look at this, where you say, this article says that, a number of Australians, a large number of Australians they're aware of crypto, but they don't use it. The question is, why don't they use it? And this is kind of like the part of the canvas that tries to answer that. Probably there's something wrong with the motivation of the people behind the usage of crypto. And if they are motivated to use crypto, is it easy enough? Do they have the ability to do it? Do they have the tools to do it? Do they have the knowledge to do it? So ability usually makes things simpler, and it makes the doing the target behavior easier. And therefore, these two elements are required. Again, I'll give you another example of this, where basically in the first version of the Canvas download, which I had created on my website, I'd said, with this Canvas download, you consent to give us your email. And I basically said, before they start the small survey to download the Canvas, that I forced them to give their email, and said, it's only if you give your email that I'll let you download the Canvas. But then I realized that people were actually skipping doing this because it reduced their ability to download the Canvas. They had the motivation to download it, but I had created fiction and I was not aligning with their motivation. So instead, what I did was I made the email drop-in as an optional thing at the end of the survey, and said, as the last question, the last point on the survey, I said, sweet, drop your email if you'd like to be in the loop. And it was an optional choice. And actually, I think that worked out much better, because now when people leave their email on after downloading the Canvas, before downloading the Canvas, they do it because they want to. It aligns with their positive motivation, and it also doesn't come across as something that stops them from downloading the Canvas. It's purely up to their choice. So human motivation, aligning with human motivation, is where the Canvas, I think, it also has its clear ethical standpoint. Is that people always ask, is behavioral design, is it manipulative? And it's not manipulative if you enable people to achieve their goals. And that's what the purpose of all good design is, to align with human motivation and to actually help people make progress in a transparent way. So if I told you that if the design is helping you to move in a direction that you want, then is that manipulation? It's not. But then if it's secretly making you do things that is against your motivation, that is against your goodwill, and your well-being, then of course that's the difference between manipulation and good behavior design. So in every context, there are a lot of different motivation theories, but I try to simplify it really here and make it very visual. In every context, there are certain positive motivators that move us, that are pulling us towards positive feelings. And then there are negative motivators, which are pushing us away from negative feelings. And these motivations are actually never on the same level. We tend to think of motivation as being somewhat equal, but actually they vary a lot depending on the context. For example, if you wanted to go running, then you would somehow think that, oh, I'm either not motivated or I am motivated to go running. But when it comes to this target behavior of mine, which is riding the bicycle, I find that the motivation level varies a lot. It can be more, it can be less. Some days it can depend on the weather, it can depend on my work or my relationships, whatever. And that's something that we need to keep in mind, is that motivation is not equal, and there are also different kinds of motivation. For example, negative motivations and positive motivations. So in my particular example, because I've chosen, as you can remember from the previous step, I said, I want to do this behavior where I want to go for a bike ride every 2 days, and I want to do it sometime in the evening. I want to switch from this behavior of browsing professional content at home in the evening. I've realized that my main motivation, or my main, the highest motivation level for me is during this period in the evening before dinner. So the key with designing the behavior there, and to figure out what motivator to use, is not with starting with the target behavior, which is what most people do, but it's really figuring out the context in which the target behavior happens, and figuring out the push and pull motivators in the context. So if you look at this context of evening before dinner, I have a few positive feeling motivators, which is I want to feel refreshed. I've had a long day at work, and I want to basically be relieved of that. I want to have a fresh mindset for the evening away from work, and that's one of the strong positive motivators in that context. But I also have certain negative motivators which I want to avoid, which I actually feel, I don't know about you, but I actually feel this, that when I work a lot with computers and I'm sitting the whole day, I have this feeling of unease from being really unfit. I feel fat and sloppy and slow. because I have just not really done anything physical the whole day, and I've been in this cloud of information. So I do not want to feel unfit, and that's like one of those negative feelings that I want to avoid. And if you think about it, these are two competing motivators, and in every context around the every context in which you want to design for a behavior change, you will find that there are competing motivators, and that's very important to keep in mind. Some of them positive, some of them negative, and I'll go a little bit into internal and external as well later. But basically, if I wanted to go for this bike ride in the context of the evening, I'm going to have to choose which motivation I'm going to align that behavior with, right? And if this sounds too complex for you, don't worry. I do this in a 1 hour, sorry, a 1 day class. So I'm going really fast right now, but this video is going to be online later, so you can refer to it and think about it. So if you think about this, the motivation of wanting to feel refreshed, going for a bike ride will want to make me feel refreshed, will make me feel refreshed, no doubt. But then I have some easy substitutes for this bike ride behavior. I can drink a cup of hot, nice beverage. I can watch something, maybe watch some Netflix or something, or watch some, John Oliver, and laugh a little bit. And these sorts of substitute behaviors basically means that I might not do this target behavior, because going for a bike ride is just so much harder than watching some comedy. So I'm going to go with this negative motivator in this case and say, let's align my target behavior with not wanting to feel unfit, which is quite painful, that feeling of not wanting to be unfit, right? And so in this align box, the first thing I've done is I have put I've narrowed down what is the motivation that I want to align with, and it's this negative motivation. I do not want to feel unfit. All right. And then I'm going to check if I have the ability and how to make it easy to do that behavior. This is the second part of this box. Abilities typically break down, like I said, into time, money, effort, resources, social proof, routines, and this one, which I really like, agency. Um, if you don't have this sort of sense of control and a sense of being able to actually drive your own life, to make your own decisions, your sense of agency comes down, and that's actually experienced as a lack of ability. So a human being in a certain context may have the time, the money, the effort, they may have the physical strength, they may have the resources, and people may be approving of it to do that behavior. But if they don't have somehow this sort of a sense of control to be able to do that behavior, they don't have agency, they may not do that behavior. So consider all of these in understanding why people don't do, or why you don't do a target behavior. For example, in this case, I was looking at a video following the coronavirus updates, and I saw a video about which said something quite interesting about Bill Gates talking about the virus. And it was titled, and I've watched quite a few of his videos and a lot of other videos as well, but this video looked very interesting. But when I started to watch it, halfway down, it was actually some ads, and it was a total fake. It was just a scam. But then I wanted to flag it. I was so pissed off that I said, hey, I want to flag this video. But YouTube makes it so hard for you to flag a video that you basically, to report that video, you have to go into this long menu, pick something, spam or misleading, choose one of those. And when you choose spam or fraud, then you have to choose the timestamp. And by the time you get to report that thing, your ability to do it is so hampered that even though your motivation to do that behavior, which is report the video, is quite high, the ability to do it is so brought down that half of the people would probably abandon that. But of course, I finished it. This is an example of how ability is super important to be able to do a behavior. So in this case, one of the ways I'm going to align my ability with, one of the ways I'm going to increase my ability with, is to actually have my bike ready, standing by the door. This is one of the things that is quite recognized in sports, is that people have the motivation, they sign up for a gym membership, but when the time to do the behavior comes, they don't have the ability because they are underprepared. Their clothes are not ready, their shoes are not ready. They just don't create the kind of situation where they literally can do the behavior right now. So in this case, I'm going to have my bike ready, standing by the door. And if you do not have the motivation, this is where things get really tricky and interesting. This is an example I like to give very much, is that when if you try to get people to say, for example, trash responsibly, and you want people to get them to sort their trash, you will find people who have the motivation to do the target behavior. They want to sort their trash, and there are others who do not. You will always find people in your target audience who don't have the motivation to do the target behavior. They may say, well, I pay my taxes, the government should take care of that, or or I don't have the time, or I'm single and I just create so little trash that I don't care about sorting it. But of course, that's a target behavior we would like people to do. So in cases where the motivation is not really present, you have to use a totally different strategy. Just amplifying the ability to do the target behavior is not going to be enough. You're going to have to change the attitude of the human or the user. You're going to have to persuade them. You might even have to use gamification. And this is where gamification comes in. It's when motivation to do something is low. Gamification is not gaming, it's not game design. People who play games have a high motivation to have fun. It's like entertainment. They come to a game with this sort of enjoyment of wow, this anticipation of wow, I want to really play this game and max it out. And creating a gamified experience, a game experience for those people is a totally different thing than gamifying a boring, unmotivating activity like doing your taxes or studying a new language, or because you want to, because you have to, or sorting your trash. These are low motivation behaviors, and gamifying them basically means adding game-like elements, game dimensions, and game mechanics to make hard behaviors easy. But if your motivation is already high, you don't need to actually you don't need to work on the amplifying motivation. You just need to make the behavior easy to do through making ability happen. So we are about 1 minute early, and that's really good because I can explain your next exercise to you. You will now work with the align box. So before this, you basically had um, a target, and then you put a behavior there, a desired behavior, and then you put in there a present behavior. Now I want you to actually add to that this motivational input. Are you aligned? Are you motivated to do the target behavior? And if yes, how do you make it easy to do the target behavior? How do you add ability to do the target behavior? And in the case of some of you, you may not be motivated to do the target behavior. Then what is your strategy? Of course, to come up with a strategy for increasing motivation, we would need a day's work or several hours of work to figure that out. I don't expect you to have the magic answer, but give it a shot and think about, like, if your motivation is really low to do this behavior, then how would you go about it? Would you try to change your mindset so you are more persuaded, or would you try to add some fun to it? And that's how you fill in the second half of this canvas, second part of this canvas. So go for it.
Yes.
Excellent. So very good. I actually had a couple of questions here, and Kalle was like pointing me to them. And I think this is a great time to actually answer one of them. The first one, actually, which I will take later in the Q&A, is how do you do this in the organizational context for bigger initiatives, by Nina Deschamps. That's a longer answer. I'll take that later. And it's relevant also for everybody. The more immediate question, which Jussi Ahola asked, was, how do negatives work in the desired behavior column? For example, do not eat any junk food being a target behavior. So the interesting thing is that in behavior design theory, designers or theorists or researchers have typically defined behavior changes, starting behaviors and stopping behaviors. So your question is more about how do you stop a negative behavior? So for me, it's very simple. In the Canvas format, you actually do not put that in the target behavior, because that is not what you want to do. That's what you want to stop. But you actually put that negative behavior in the present behavior and say, I'm currently eating junk food. How do I switch from eating junk food to something that's positive? Because the problem with stopping behaviors, which other researchers don't acknowledge, is that yes, it's cool to stop a behavior, but what do you replace it with? And that's the problem that I think most addicts, and even if you want to stop smoking, something like that, the question is, what do you replace it with? So put the undesirable behavior in the present column and develop a new target behavior in the desired behavior column, which you can actually switch to, right? Makes sense? Cool. So I'm going to jump. There's a few more questions. How does the curiosity mindset? Yes, these are, I'll have to think about taking these later. Move on with the canvas, move to the third part, for which we have also 15 minutes. And in the end, I hope we will have some time to look at all your questions. I'm going to jump into the third part, which is the shaping of the behavior itself. The shaping of the behavior, I have relied on typically what's called a habit loop in behavioral design, behavior science, but I'm moving away from the design of habits. So two dominant theories that tend to come up a lot in behavioral change is nudge theory, of course, which most people are familiar with, and I want to touch upon that a little bit in the end. Behavior design is not only nudging. Nudging is a part of behavior design, but I think behavior design is larger, it's more holistic. And I hope I can talk about that. The other thing is behavior design is not just habit formation. In fact, habits are a very specific and I would say even narrow part of behavior design, because habits are essentially done unconsciously. And while they do create a sort of predictability, they also make the mind sort of, in some sense, dull. When you're habitual, you're not really innovating. You're not thinking of novel stuff. I'm more interested in novelty than habits, and really the balance between habits and novelty. That's a more complex conversation. So even though I have used the format of a typical habit loop in this third part of shape, I actually just call it the behavior loop, because a behavior itself, even for a behavior to happen once, behavioral science theory says that we need these three elements. The first part is cue, which is essentially a trigger, which says that you should do the behavior now. I'll spend a little bit of time talking about the cue. So the first part is cue, the second is actually the action, and the third is the reward that you get from doing that behavior, and that's a typical behavior loop. When we look at cues, let's go back to that coffee shop example. Again, referencing BJ Fogg here. If you might have the motivation to drink coffee in that moment, you might even have the ability, you have the money, the shop is open, it's all working fine. But somehow, if there is not a trigger, if there's not a cue in the moment which says do this behavior now, theory says that you most likely will not do that behavior. And that's really important. The cue in this context could be the smell of coffee, it could be the sight of the shop itself. And this cue can also be something internal inside you, because in the mornings when we wake up, if you're used to drinking coffee, you actually can feel this urge for coffee. It's also interesting that some addictive products, technology products, we happen to develop internal cues for them, and this is why we constantly check our phones. Facebook or Instagram may start off with external cues. For example, it may start off with a notification, but then after a while, those cues become internal. Okay, internal and external cues. We'll go into that a little bit later. So also when you think of cues, think of cues as being active, passive, or somewhere in between, which is a mixed cue. An active cue is also sometimes called a hot trigger. It's something that forces you or tells you to do a behavior right now, like a car honking in your face. Now, if you were in the path of a car, you didn't notice and it honked loudly, the cue to do a behavior, which is move out of the way, is so immediate that you cannot ignore it. You're just it's call and response. It's like hot trigger. But a passive cue, maybe a friend sitting across the bar, but it's a cue for you to maybe go and say hi, but he is not actively engaging you in the middle there. He's not calling out to you. He's just present there, and it's your choice if you want to respond to that cue or not. And that's a passive cue. It's also a trigger that says do a behavior, but it's not really forcing you to do that behavior. And then finally, we have something like a smartphone notification, which is a complex mix of active and passive. It depends on the message. If you're waiting for that message, it can be a very active cue. The notification can be something you jump at and attend to. If it's something like what we see on the screen there, a WhatsApp message and then a Twitter message, it's just sitting there. It's more passive, because you could reply to Oscar right now, you could reply to Oscar later, or check Twitter later. So you need to think about the kinds of cues and what cue you want to design to make your target behavior happen. And you can also think of multiple cues to make the same target behavior happen, depending on the context and the situation. So as you can see, behavior design is quite elaborate. Now, I want to talk about an interesting example connected again to fitness, which is around how cueing is sometimes used to get us to do things that are not very nice, or just do wrong stuff. There's a lot of advertising in the health and fitness industry where an ad says, for example, here, strengthen your body and mind, live fully. Thousands have improved their well-being with online coaching. You can do it. Start the free trial, right? This is an interesting cue, start the free trial. What happens is this cue, this trigger works in a context, for example, where you are taking a New Year resolution. You've gone through Christmas and New Year's and you feel like joining a gym. This is a hot trigger at that point, because your motivation to do something about your fitness is quite high. And so you might actually be tempted to respond to this trigger. You also have the ability, you have the money. But then if you look at the fine print, it reads something like this. You scroll down the same web page and it says, try it free for 2 weeks, get unlimited access, cancel anytime, yada, yada. But then you get the free trial by starting a 12-month membership within 24 hours of signing up. And if not canceled during the free trial, it's 120 euros billed to you at one time. So what is actually happening? And I'm not blaming salespeople, and I'm not blaming the product being sold. I'm just saying that that trigger works really well, but it taps into the wrong motivation, which is this desire to make a New Year resolution, to sign up for something which you experience in that moment of high motivation at the end of the holiday, and the motivation in which you make that, the moment in which you make the decision to take this product, but then and keep and trigger you to actually continue to join to do the actual workout throughout the year, which is where I think they should be focusing their product design. In this general category, I'm not talking about a specific product. So we end up with this sort of situation again, where you have a lot of people who bought those gym memberships because they were in that moment of high motivation to buy something and to get started. And the product was designed very well. It was cute. They were cued to actually buy it for 120 euros a month. But then there was no behavior design built into the experience of actually going to the gym, staying at the gym, measuring their progress. All of that is where behavior design can add so much more and move us towards fitness, not just in the purchase of the gym experience. Okay, just an example of a trigger. So going back to cues or triggers, you have internal cues. Like I said earlier, this kind of urge to drink coffee. So when it comes to my biking behavior, some of my internal cues to the starts of these are not actually cues, but these may be sources of cues. Maybe that I need this fresh air. You see, in the evening, I'm feeling this sort of unfit, groggy. I want some entertainment, and I probably want some company at that point in time. These are some of the sources of internal cues from where I could find some cues to trigger my target behavior. But then I can also rely on some external cues, such as the doorbell. These are just examples, or a notification from a phone, or a call from a friend. So what I've actually decided to do in this situation is that I'm going to actually get my friend to actually be my biking partner and give me a call to remind me. So I'm relying on an external cue, and I'm relying on a social cue, which is hard to ignore. It's also a hot trigger, if you think about it, because if a friend, for example, Carla, is calling me in the evening at 7 p.m. Or sending me a text message saying, Ash, time for that bike right now, it's hard to ignore. It's not something that's passive and just sitting there and it's optional for me to do. I have to do something about it. And then we try to design an action which will actually help me do that target behavior. And here you see, I'm not just going for the bike ride. I need to get really specific. And I say, the first action is to actually take the friend's call and commit to meet. So instead of just leaving it as an option there and saying, I'll get back to you later, What if I design my action to say, I actually respond and commit to meet? I'm like, sure, see you there in 15 minutes. Once I've committed to that action, then it's going to be very hard to pull out and actually not do the target behavior. And finally, as you can see, the canvas, the parts of the canvas have relationships to each other. The action here is actually a micro version or an adapted version of the desired behavior. My desired behavior is to go for a bike ride every 2 days. The action here is to actually take the friend's call and say, I will meet. It's a micro behavior within this larger behavior going for the bike ride. And the cue and actually the reward as well are usually very closely mapped to the motivation. So if you understand the motivation, that's why understanding the motivation, is it positive, negative, is it where is it coming from, this drive to do that behavior. If you understand it deeply, then you can design a good cue and then design a good reward around it. So I do not want to feel unfit, and basically I'm getting my partner to call me, which is kind of like a social reminder that, are you doing something about your fitness, Ash? It's a friend asking about that is much more powerful than just me reminding myself. All right. And finally, I want to go into rewards. Each of these areas, I mean, on the canvas, honestly, there's a lot of theory behind attitudes, gamification, persuasion, behavior change, triggering, action itself, and of course, abilities. All of these areas have a lot of theory, and then reward theory is super interesting as well. So I just want to open up reward theory a little bit and give you two different views as to how rewards have been understood in behavioral science. One is the more familiar view through the Maslow's hierarchy, but actually it's been replicated many times in different. And there are people, all of these theories have their favorites. There are people who have vouched by them, and others who do not. I just have my preferences, and I tend to use some of them. For me, the sort of like a, not necessarily a hierarchy, but the fact that we have survival level rewards, we seek survival level rewards, which are usually information, food, shelter. These are basic rewards that we need in order to feel all right. Those are fundamental. And then above that, in some ways, we need social acceptance, belonging, family, friendship. It's it's not fun to be an island. These are the kinds of rewards we seek. But then we also seek rewards of the self, psychological rewards, identity, meaning, purpose, these sorts of things. I'm not trying to say that, survival has to come before self and social, but the idea that these are a sort of hierarchy is very strong, not just in social science and anthropology, but also in areas like depth psychology and stuff like that, where, for example, the pyramid or the temple being essentially a representation of the self. And why do we have these pyramidal sort of structures so strongly across world architecture? It's been linked to actually this sort of growth towards self-transformation, a symbol of transformation. So that's the existential view. And these are three sources of reward. So for example, what I did in this case was I picked up a social reward also when I got my friend to call me. And as well as the reward of feeling fresh, which is much more of a survival reward. Okay, but you can also look at rewards from a temporal view, which is from a timeline perspective. And this is super interesting. A lot of behavioral economics gets into this in different ways, and they try to understand value through time. So the fact that how we value our present, how we value our potential future, and it's 2 minutes. Yeah. And how we actually value the past is very important. So for example, the peak end rule is a very well-known rule. This is my last slide on rewards, is that basically, if you look at it here, we say we judge our past experience by how they were at their peak and how they ended. It's a brilliant piece of research, where basically you don't look at your entire experience in the past, but you look at where were the best moments of that experience, as well as how it ended. So there are many ways to look at rewards. And again, I will not, this is all I have time for. But the reward that I'm basically using here is to say, well, I want to feel fitter, and I have the additional reward of social bonding and fun. And that's what I've put into my canvas here. So move on to your exercise now. We are right on time. You have these 3 boxes to fill, and based on your canvas so far, try to figure out what is the cue or the trigger that you will use to do the target behavior, what is the exact action you will take as part of the target behavior, and what reward you will get out of it. You have.
He's already had few questions before. Nina Deschamps, are you still online? Would you like to pose your question to, because you were the first one, would you like to pose it out loud with your microphone on and pose it out loud to Ashwin?
Yeah, hi, this is Nina.
Hi.
Yeah, I have this question around the use of Canvas in this in the case of organizational change. How would you go about that?
Yes.
Especially if you want to bring in some kind of cultural changes or,
Yes.
for instance, agility as a ways of working.
Absolutely. In fact, there's another question. I can answer two questions at the same time because Sari Lane has said, this is great and simple canvas for an individual. How would you use it in bigger groups, for example, for Finnish citizens? I was having a conversation with a director at a global NGO recently, and she was talking about wanting to turn their entire organization to be more sustainable, right? And after discussing strategies and plans and ideas for how to make the organization more sustainable, I said, well, what does that person who's sitting in that cubicle there, what does that lady do differently? What behavior change does she do differently if the organization has to become more sustainable? And we thought about it for a bit, and all of the ideas they had so far were attitudinal. They were like, they should talk more, they should be more aware about sustainability, they should discuss sustainability more. But then behavior change isn't those things. It is wash less coffee cups in the washing machine, or remember to turn off the lights, or use less paper. These are examples of concrete behavior changes that individuals should do for there to be larger systemic changes. So there are no behavioral strategies that are not at the individual level. And so this sort of thinking that, well, when we think about the entire citizens or the entire organization, somehow we have to think at a macro level, is already moving away from behavior design principles, which is thinking about what does the individual do in order to have larger impact, and does the individual have the motivation to do it. And groups of these individuals with the right motivation to do the target behavior actually create the sorts of organizational changes you're looking for, whether they are sustainability, whether they are lean, changes in work practices, what have you. You have to think about the final target human being and what they have to do differently and what they're switching from. Okay, makes sense? Next question, please.
Yes. Johanna Kiesiläinen-Riihellä had one question during the presentation, and now I must say that we appreciate short questions so that we can get as many questions as possible here. But Johanna Kiesiläinen-Riihellä, would you like to open your microphone, please?
Yes, I was thinking, how about the curiosity mindset? How does it affect the agency?
Sorry?
Do you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Yes. I was thinking that curiosity, how does it affect on that behavior change and the mindset of the trying different kind of things and so on?
Yeah, I think curiosity is a very important element because curiosity has an implicit motivation behind it, right? You have to have the desire to know something or desire to understand something new, which is essentially a motivational impulse. And I think that curiosity is really important in the second box, for example, as a driver of action. Agency is slightly different. Agency is, curiosity is more like an attribute, like you can say a cat is curious, but does a cat experience agency? Agency is more like a subjective experience. It is me feeling like I have control. It's me feeling like I have choice. It's me feeling like I am doing this action, this behavior out of my own free will. And that's agency. That's a subjective feeling. So those two things are kind of different.
Good, great, thank you. And then Rea Pihlasvirta, you had your hand raised. Please pose your question.
Yes, hello. After all doing this, finally in the action, how do you actually do it? How do you make yourself, like in your example, that you take the call and you meet with your friend and go for a bike ride? How do you do it?
That's how you do it. I'm sitting at home in the evening, Kalle calls me, I take the call and I go to the bike ride. And if it doesn't work, I try to understand, is my motivation a problem? Is is the trigger a problem? I have to refine the model. There is no gap between what you should put on the canvas and what you do. You're exactly trying to capture what you do on the canvas. That's the purpose of the tool.
Okay, so there are no because they are only things on a paper, or so how do you force yourself, or how do you motivate really? Do you have any tricks, or
Well, the call from Kalle is not something that's happening to me in the real world. The paper is just a strategy to actually do the thing, right? When the call comes, it's going to be real. So I'm going to have the choice to either do it or not do it. And if I don't do it, then I will have to review my strategy. Is Kalle not important enough to me? Am I too tired? What is going on? Right?
Yes, but then it means that the action should include something social.
Not necessarily. Like I said, rewards can be internal, external, they can be psychological. For example, I might just decide to go for a bike ride on my own impulse. The social reward, the social element is only one dimension of it. Can I move on to the next question, please?
Yes, Sari Laine had a question in chat, but would you like to post it out loud, Sari?
Hi, I think Ashwin already answered it. I asked about how to use this in a bigger group and like for Finnish citizens of Finland. But still, I think could you answer more of how you use this canvas for designing a bigger group?
Well, you get an entire group of people together. For example, if Citra Lab wanted, I don't know, more people to attend their Heramo events, we would take that as the behavior change that we wanted. We would get together in a group. We would print the canvas really large or make a shared canvas and actually say, well, the target behavior we want is to figure out how to get more people to attend attend the event, and then say, well, let's try to research on what is the present behavior. What is it those people are doing right now? Well, they're going to work. That's interesting. So that's a big lack of ability, because even if someone has the motivation to come to this event, if it's a breakfast event and you're going to work, you cannot go there. So we have to change the timing of the event. So we have to give them the ability for those who are motivated. And we say, well, how do we give them the ability? Well, we maybe change the timing of the event and make it towards the evening, or we don't target people who want to go to work or something like that. So you basically get together as a group and brainstorm on those concrete boxes and try to figure stuff out. All right. There's an interesting example question here from Petri Herto saying, I can't see how this canvas differs from habit models like Eyal's Hook or Duhigg's Power of Habit. What is the key difference? Well, as I mentioned, the canvas itself is a 3-part canvas, and habit models like Hooked and Power of Habit and several others are actually only what the canvas covers in the 3rd and final part. Again, like I said during the habit discussion, the goal is not to build a habit. The canvas is not trying to build a habit. It's just trying to shape a behavior and figure out what are the elements of the target behavior, which I think is very important. The first thing to do before you think about the continuity of that behavior. A habit is a behavior that continues over a period of time, and it's done without much reflection. So it's done more unconsciously. It's a different sort of a tangent in behavior design. And this canvas differs because it has 2 other pieces, which is the motivational piece and the targeting piece, before it comes to the loop. And even the loop is not it's not a habit loop. So of course, I'm very inspired by the work of these guys and all others before me, but the canvas is I would say a hybrid or hopefully an advancement on their work. It's not the same.
Great. Thank you, Ashwin, and thank you for all the questions. Unfortunately, we have to move on to the next thing right now, but if you still have time to stay here in this room after 10:30, so we have time to answer at least those questions in the chat. But now, please, Riina Pulkkinen, my colleague, she has visualized this event in her iPad, or on her iPad. Riina, would you like to share the picture with us to show how this event looked from your perspective?
well, I can try. I'm gonna share my screen with you, and actually I took the canvas and draw something to it, and then I also made some other notes, so we can share them both.
Yes.
But the canvas right now looks like this. So if these are any use for you
That's your
guys,
talent.
I'm happy to share them with you.
Awesome. So yeah, we will send this to you guys afterwards. But do you wanna say a few words about this, or is it so that it?
Well, I hope you
Oh, wow, the whole chat conversation is full of wow, 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 love it. Go, Riina.
Thanks.
Videos there. Big smiles, I can say.
Right.
Yeah, if you don't have time in this second, don't worry, we will share this Riina's masterpiece with you. Now we did first things that the discussion continues.
See my contacts there for people who want to
Yeah,
get
we
in
will
touch.
share
Thank you.
them afterwards. Now, sorry, I have to take your screen to show mine. Yes, here we go. Code have changed. So now it seems that the code is, when you use the code, use 459953. Kalle, could you put it in the chat as well? So 459953. Great, now it works. What a demo effect. Probably when I opened it already once, so it changed the code for some reason, but please share your insights. And you can write either in English or in Finnish, which suits you best. I will share this with you later. And meanwhile, here I can say that we're every time when we have had these Herämö events, we will write after the event a blog post called Lablogi and share the material, which means the video and the slides, and also, for example, this Mentimeter form. So you will receive all of these afterwards. It's 10:30 now. If someone needs to run to the next meeting, we thank you. We will stay here still. If you have some questions or if you want to continue the discussion about this Mentimeter or whatsoever, we will stay here for 15 minutes. And if you want to digest this information for a bit and continue the discussion with this group, we have Heräämö After Talk event on Wednesday morning. So this Wednesday, 27th, and it will start at 9 o'clock. It's for 1 hour and 15 minutes. And the idea of it is that now when you receive lots of new information and new ideas and you would like to talk about these ideas with someone, so this is the place to be. It's very informal, it's chat like I do now, and if there are more people, we will share you in a small breakout rooms, kind of like coffee room talk. So if you want to come here, you will find the link to the registration, to Zoom registration, in the chat right now, and you are mostly welcome. It's just for 1 hour, 15 minutes, and the idea of it is to continue the chat where it ended here. Please repeat the date and time. So the date is 27th of March, and it's this Friday, and we will start 9 o'clock, and it's for 1 hour and 15 minutes. And you find the link to the registration now in the chat. I hope you have answered this Mentimeter feedback form, and thank you for joining us. At least from my point of view, it was a very, very good event to see so many of you there and a lot of interaction. Thank you, everyone. Have a beautiful day, even though it's in these extraordinary circumstances. If someone still wants to pose a question, where there are still people in the room, we're happy to answer. At least someone asked about if this Q&A section will be on the video as well. It will. And someone asked about extra reading tips from Ashwin. Would you like to answer to this one? You already mentioned in our intro video, you already mentioned 2 books. Additional readings.
Well, I would say that you have to kind of find your path towards it. You know, all behavioral economics books are a good place to start. Dan Ariely's books, Predictably Irrational, The Upside of Irrationality. Nudge Theory is important to read. Nudge, Misbehaving by Richard Thaler. Those are important books. Also, Thinking Fast and Slow, the book that has to be understood. I'm still trying to understand that book. There's so much going on there. But you can read specifically books on gamification. You can read Persuasive Technology by B.J. Fogg. You can read Hooked by Nir Eyal. You can also read books like When Coffee and Kale Compete. It's a book on jobs to be done. So,
and that book, wasn't it so that you can download it free online? when kale?
Books that I would buy. These are all
Uh,
for
this kale book.
coffee and kale. When
Yeah.
coffee and kale compete is specifically a free download as online. Yeah, but that kind of applies a little bit to the first part of switching between. I've used that in the first part of the canvas during the target phase. But really, if you're interested in behavior design, just read a lot. Just read, if it's a well-recommended book, books like Nano Habits, Atomic Habits, Tiny Habits, habit design books. Those books are also very, very interesting. There is no final one book which answers this really complex puzzle called human behavior. We only can gain more knowledge and get better about it. If you want to read the biological basis of behavior, there's a book called Behave, just simply Behave, which is a fantastic book. Highly recommend it, but it's full of neuroscience, for example.
People also ask about podcast tips.
I would listen to the podcasts of the authors that I just mentioned.
Okay, so they also have podcasts about those.
Yes, it's about finding the right thinkers, right? That's the key, is to find the leading thinkers in the field and the thinkers that
leading thinkers, yeah.
Yes, and whether they write books or do YouTube videos or do interviews or podcasts, I don't care about the medium or write books. It's about getting to the distilled core of their thought, because we are, after all, applied thinkers and we are applied practitioners. So we can't do a PhD. I can't do a PhD on rewards, for example. I have to go and find the scholar, the one who's done the PhD on rewards that applies to my work and actually experiment with it. So a lot of the work of applied design is the search for the right theory, the right model, which works. And I forget the scholar's name, but I discovered a European scholar recently who was doing some really incredible work in agency and control, really new work. There is a lot of work in decision science, for example, which I really like. Decision making. How do we make decisions? That's very, very interesting too. But also, if you start looking at, again, I'm a designer, so Don Norman and other experienced design thinkers, very important as well. So it's terribly hard to say that, hey, this is the book you should read. For me, it's a process of just gathering as much insight as I can from different fields and combining them. Maybe tomorrow it's AI and data science that we need to be reading. We need to be following those guys, those thinkers more.
Good. We have also still one more question from Sara Komulainen here in the chat. Sara, would you like to read it out loud, or would you like me to do that for you?
Well, I can do it by myself. I was just thinking, because I work in a school environment, and during the presentation I was thinking that we have quite many motivations going through in a school. We have these motivations that drive us to do things that aren't actually that good when we think about it as a social environment. And I was thinking that, have you ever used this canvas to understand better why we actually behave in a bad way, or why we have these unhealthy habits? Because I think it could actually work for that to understand like more detailed why we behave as we behave right now, not just to understand how we could actually work and how we could behave.
Yeah, so that's the basic difference between research, analysis, and design. Design is not about understanding why. It's not just that. It's more about making something actionable, making something happen. So the canvas is not a tool for understanding why. It's a tool for applying the why to design a behavior. It's not an analytical tool primarily. It's not a research tool. There are other tools for that. So if you wanted to understand why we behaved in a particular way, then we would probably have to research that context and, design maybe experiments and try to figure out why someone does what they do in a particular context. But the canvas begins with the input from that part of the work where you say, well, people do this and we want them to do something else. And we can motivate them because they do this for these reasons. Does it make sense?
Yeah, it does.
Time itself is an act of moving forward with the new form of something, rather than a retrospective view of looking at data and trying to understand why that happened.
Thank you.
Great. There aren't any more questions in the chat. Would someone still? Oh, there is no. Oh, that was just. Thank you. Is there still someone who would like to ask something or say something about this event out loud? We're still here for 5 more minutes before we switch off this Zoom room.
This went really well.
Yes, good job.
Interesting exercise, and thank you so much to the Citra Labs awesome team for scaling, turning the crisis into an opportunity.
Thank you. And thank you for joining. Thank you for taking accepting this challenge, because you had to make quite big changes also in your presentation. But I guess the future will be like this, like we have to do some more virtual workshops and events. So this was a good.
It's a very different experience, I must say. It's very different from a live audience. I have to think.
Yes.
It's different.
And also, for example, now no one has their videos on here, so it seems like I'm talking. Yeah. Well, you do, just we two.
Do you have an example of where you have used the canvas in a more complex setting, just to see how it works with more complex problems? Sure. We've tried to apply the canvas, for example, in settings where we wanted to change stakeholder behavior in the organization, right? So if you're trying to say add automation to an organization, or you're trying to change how an organization works, let's say you want to change how Citra works because of the coronavirus, and you want to change multiple people's behaviors which have impacts on other people's behaviors. The canvas can be applied there, and we have done it in a similar but different case, looking at organizational change. It can be applied there by looking at who are the key stakeholders in that organizational transformation, whose behaviors we need to change. And complexity is something that you let happen. Complexity is not something that just exists out there. You can control complexity by simplifying it, and that also is an act of design. So basically, data complexity, for example, you can either decide to take 50,000 different data points and make your problem very complex, or you can reduce your problem, the complexity down, and say, we're going to deal with these 3 data points. And that's kind of what we did. We said, well, there are 20 behavior changes we want happen, but those 20 behavior changes are triggered by 3 core behavior changes on the part of 3 core stakeholders. They might be leadership, they might be sales, they might be something else. So what changes do sales leaders need to make in order for there to be these cascading effects onto others? And so focus that and use the canvas there. I think this is the last question I'm going to.
Yes, that was the last question, and exactly the kind of example I was looking for. Thanks, says Ninja. Great, I think there are no more questions. So.
Ayala Asif. Hey Anna, how are you doing? We know each other. Of course, I'll share it with you. We know each other. So I'll find I've downloaded a chapter of this Agency Scholars book, and I will make sure to share it with you, and you can even chat about it.
Great.
Yeah.
But now, I thank once more people who are still in the room, and thank you so much, Ashwin, for joining us.
So much. Take care, guys. Thank you.
Take care.
Be safe.
Bye.